2 years after their historic handshake, Traoré and Gates stood together in the gleaming halls of the Ouagadougou Medical Center, watching the first doses of locally manufactured vaccines roll off the production line. The moment represented more than industrial achievement. It symbolized a new chapter in African healthcare independence and international cooperation. The facility had exceeded every expectation. Operating at full capacity, it was producing over 50 million vaccine doses annually, with distribution networks reaching across West Africa. The integrated traditional modern medicine approach had become a model studied by health organizations worldwide, proving that innovation could emerge from unexpected cultural synthesis. Mama Diallo, now recognized as an honorary professor at the University of Ouagadougou, led the ceremonial blessing of the first production run. Traditional drummers performed alongside a modern orchestra, their rhythms echoing through laboratories where world-class scientists worked alongside traditional healers who had been transformed into community health advocates. The economic transformation of Burkina Faso had been remarkable. Unemployment in Ouagadougou had dropped to historic lows as the pharmaceutical sector created ripple effects throughout the economy. Young people who had once sought opportunities abroad were now returning home to join one of Africa's most dynamic industries. International recognition had followed success. The World Health Organization had officially endorsed the integrated healthcare model, recommending its adoption in other developing countries. Gates had used the Burkina Faso experience to launch similar initiatives in 6 additional African nations, creating a continental network of pharmaceutical manufacturing and healthcare innovation. The security challenges that had once seemed insurmountable had been largely resolved through community engagement. Rural villages that were once suspicious of government programs had become fierce protectors of the healthcare facilities that were transforming their lives. Local ownership had indeed proved to be the most effective security strategy. Research discoveries emerging from the traditional modern medicine collaboration were generating significant intellectual property revenues for Burkina Faso. The plant-based vaccine enhancer discovered by joint research teams was being licensed to pharmaceutical companies worldwide, creating a sustainable income stream that would fund healthcare programs for generations. Gates's approach to philanthropy had evolved significantly through the Burkina Faso experience. Rather than imposing solutions developed in Western laboratories, his foundation was now prioritizing partnerships that built on local knowledge and capabilities. The success had influenced his work in education, agriculture, and climate change as well. Traoré's political position had been strengthened immeasurably by the program's success. What had begun as a risky partnership with a foreign billionaire had transformed him into a visionary leader whose innovative approaches were being studied across Africa. His military background had proven valuable in managing the complex logistics of international cooperation. The facility's impact on regional health outcomes was already measurable. Malaria rates had dropped by 60% in areas served by the new vaccines, while other targeted diseases showed similar improvements. The integration of traditional healing practices had increased community acceptance and compliance, maximizing the vaccine's effectiveness. Educational partnerships had created pathways for Burkinabe students to study at top international universities, while ensuring they returned home to contribute to their country's development. The brain drain that had historically weakened African countries was being reversed as local opportunities became more attractive than emigration. The renewable energy systems powering the facility had become a model for sustainable industrial development. Solar panels and battery storage ensured reliable power while reducing environmental impact, demonstrating that African manufacturing could be both competitive and environmentally responsible. Quality control systems had earned international pharmaceutical certification, allowing Burkina Faso manufactured vaccines to be exported globally. The country had transformed from a medicine importer to a pharmaceutical exporter in just 2 years, dramatically improving its trade balance and foreign currency reserves. Traditional healers trained through the program had established healing centers throughout West Africa, creating a network that combined indigenous knowledge with modern medical techniques. These facilities were providing healthcare access to remote communities that had never received regular medical attention. The success had attracted additional international investment beyond healthcare. Technology companies were establishing operations in Ouagadougou, attracted by the skilled workforce and innovative business environment. The city was becoming a regional hub for science and technology development. Gates and Traoré had maintained regular communication throughout the program's implementation, their relationship evolving from formal diplomatic courtesy to genuine partnership and mutual respect. Their different backgrounds, American technology entrepreneur and African military leader, had proven complementary in addressing complex development challenges. The handshake that had started everything was now commemorated in a bronze statue at the entrance to the medical center. Local artists had captured the moment when two worlds came together in pursuit of shared humanitarian goals, creating a symbol of international cooperation based on mutual respect rather than dependency. Looking toward the future, both leaders were planning expansions of their successful model. Additional facilities were being planned for other regions of Burkina Faso, while neighboring countries were requesting technical assistance in establishing their own integrated healthcare systems. The approach was spreading organically across Africa. As they toured the facility together for what might be their final joint visit, Gates and Traoré reflected on how a simple handshake had catalyzed transformations neither had fully envisioned. Their partnership had demonstrated that genuine collaboration between philanthropists and developing country leaders could produce innovations that benefited everyone. The legacy of their historic meeting would extend far beyond vaccines and healthcare. They had proven that Africa could be a source of solutions rather than just problems, that traditional knowledge could enhance rather than hinder modern science, and that international cooperation could respect sovereignty while addressing shared challenges. The future of African healthcare had been forever changed by two men who chose partnership over paternalism, innovation over convention, and hope over skepticism. Their handshake had indeed been historic, not just for what it initiated, but for what it represented about the possibilities for genuine collaboration in addressing humanity's greatest challenges. The third morning brought unexpected turbulence to the carefully orchestrated negotiations. News had leaked to international media about the Gates-Traoré discussions, triggering a firestorm of reactions across social media and diplomatic circles. Protesters had gathered outside the presidential palace, carrying signs both supporting and opposing the vaccine initiative. Traoré watched from his office window as crowds chanted in the streets below. Some demonstrators held banners thanking Gates for bringing hope to Burkina Faso, while others demanded that foreign influence be rejected. The division among his people reflected the complexity of the decision he faced. International pressure was mounting from multiple directions. The African Union had requested detailed briefings on the proposal, concerned about precedents for foreign investment in strategic healthcare sectors. European pharmaceutical companies, feeling threatened by potential competition from an African manufacturing hub, had begun lobbying their governments to discourage the partnership. Meanwhile, rival global health organizations were questioning whether the Gates Foundation's approach represented genuine partnership or a new form of medical colonialism. Critics argued that wealthy philanthropists should not have such influence over African healthcare policy, regardless of their good intentions. Gates remained calm amid the storm of criticism, having weathered similar controversies throughout his philanthropic career. He understood that transformative change often provoked strong reactions from those who benefited from existing systems. During an emergency strategy session, he reassured Traoré that public skepticism was normal and manageable. The morning's most significant development came through diplomatic channels. The World Health Organization had formally requested to review the vaccine's clinical trial data before any manufacturing agreement could be finalized. While this was standard procedure, it would delay implementation by at least 6 months. Dr. Mbeki explained that the WHO review process, though necessary, reflected broader institutional resistance to innovation in global health. Traditional regulatory pathways were designed for conventional vaccines, not the revolutionary mRNA technology they were proposing. Navigating these bureaucratic challenges would require patience and political skill. Traoré convened his National Security Council to assess the various pressures and opportunities. Defense Minister Colonel Ousmane Zongo expressed concern about the security implications of hosting such a high-profile facility. Intelligence reports suggested that terrorist groups were already planning potential attacks on the proposed vaccine plant. However, economic advisor Dr. Marie Bansay painted a different picture. Her analysis showed that the economic benefits far outweighed the security risks. The vaccine manufacturing facility would anchor a broader medical technology cluster, attracting additional foreign investment and creating a skilled workforce that could support other industries. The debate within Traoré's inner circle reflected the broader national conversation happening across Burkina Faso. Traditional chiefs from rural areas had sent delegations expressing cautious support, remembering too many broken promises from foreign partners. Urban intellectuals were divided between those who saw opportunity and others who feared cultural imperialism. Gates used the diplomatic delays to address public concerns directly. He arranged a live television broadcast from the University of Ouagadougou, where he answered questions from students, professors, and community leaders. His message was consistent. This partnership was designed to build local capacity, not create dependence. The most pointed question came from a medical student named Fatima Sawadogo, who challenged Gates about previous failed health initiatives across Africa. She demanded specific guarantees that this program would be different from others that had promised transformation, but delivered disappointment. Gates acknowledged her concerns honestly. He admitted that some previous programs had indeed failed to deliver lasting benefits, often because they were designed without sufficient local input or long-term planning. This initiative was different precisely because it prioritized local ownership and capacity building from the beginning. Behind closed doors, more sensitive negotiations were taking place. Representatives from China and Russia had quietly approached Traoré's government, offering alternative partnerships if the Gates initiative proved unsatisfactory. The geopolitical competition for influence in Africa was intensifying, with healthcare emerging as a new battleground. Traoré found himself at the center of forces much larger than Burkina Faso. His decision would influence not just his country's health outcomes but the broader relationship between Africa and various global powers. The young captain who had seized power to improve his people's lives now carried responsibilities that extended far beyond national borders. The economic calculations were becoming clearer through detailed feasibility studies. The vaccine manufacturing facility would generate approximately $200 million in annual revenue once fully operational. More importantly, it would reduce Burkina Faso's dependence on imported medicines and potentially transform the country into a pharmaceutical exporter. Yet financial projections meant little if the program couldn't overcome political and social resistance. Traoré's advisors warned that proceeding without broader public support could undermine his government's legitimacy. The protests outside continued to grow, with both supporters and opponents becoming more organized and vocal. Religious leaders had also entered the debate, with some praising the potential to save lives while others questioned whether the new vaccines were consistent with traditional healing practices. Imam Abdullah Sankara and Archbishop Paul Ouedraogo issued a joint statement calling for careful consideration of both medical benefits and cultural implications. As evening approached, Traoré realized that his handshake with Gates had set in, motion forces that neither man could fully control. The vaccine initiative had become a symbol of broader questions about Africa's relationship with the developed world, the role of philanthropy in global health, and the balance between sovereignty and cooperation in addressing shared challenges. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Traditional healer Mama Fatou Diallo, one of the most respected figures in Burkina Faso's rural communities, requested a private meeting with both Traoré and Gates. Her influence extended across ethnic and religious lines, making her endorsement crucial for public acceptance of any health initiative. Mama Diallo arrived at the palace accompanied by representatives from traditional healing associations across West Africa. At 78 years old, she had witnessed decades of interaction between indigenous medicine and modern healthcare. Her weathered hands held the wisdom of countless patients treated with herbs, prayers, and ancestral knowledge. Gates listened respectfully as she explained the deep skepticism Many rural communities felt toward foreign medicines. Previous vaccination campaigns had sometimes been conducted without proper consultation with traditional authorities, creating lasting mistrust. Any successful program would need to bridge the gap between modern science and indigenous healing. Practices Traoré served as translator, not just for language but for cultural understanding. He explained to Gates that traditional healers weren't opposed to modern medicine, but they demanded respect for their knowledge and inclusion in healthcare decisions. Mama Diallo's communities had used plant-based remedies for malaria and other diseases for generations. The elderly healer proposed a radical solution. Rather than replacing traditional medicine, the new vaccine program should complement existing practices. Traditional healers could be trained as community health advocates, helping to explain the vaccine's benefits while maintaining their cultural authority and knowledge systems. This integration approach excited Dr. Mbeki, who had studied similar collaborative models in other countries. Research showed that healthcare programs succeeded when they worked with existing community structures rather than attempting to replace them. Traditional healers could become powerful allies in promoting vaccine acceptance. Gates, immediately, saw the potential. Training traditional healers as vaccine advocates would address one of the program's biggest challenges, reaching remote rural communities where government health workers rarely traveled. These respected community figures could provide education and reassurance in ways that foreign experts never could. The conversation shifted to practical implementation. Mama Diallo suggested establishing healing centers that would offer both traditional remedies and modern vaccines. These facilities could serve as bridges between different medical traditions while providing comprehensive health care to underserved populations. Traoré was particularly interested in the economic implications of this hybrid approach. Traditional healing was already a significant informal economy, with thousands of practitioners earning modest livings from their services. Formalizing their role in the healthcare system could improve their incomes while expanding access to both traditional and modern medicine. The discussions revealed surprising common ground between traditional healing and modern vaccine science. Both approaches emphasized prevention over treatment, both recognized the importance of community health, and both acknowledged that effective medicine required understanding local conditions and populations. However, significant challenges remained. Training traditional healers in vaccine administration would require careful curriculum development, ensuring they understood both the science and the safety protocols. Quality control systems would need to prevent contamination or improper storage, while respecting traditional practices. Religious considerations also required delicate handling. Some traditional healing practices incorporated spiritual elements that might conflict with certain religious beliefs. The program would need to accommodate diverse spiritual traditions while maintaining scientific standards. Gates proposed establishing a traditional modern medicine integration institute at the University of Ouagadougou. This facility would research the effectiveness of various traditional remedies while training healers in modern medical techniques. The approach could revolutionize healthcare delivery across Africa. International observers were watching these developments with great interest. The World Health Organization had never endorsed a program that formally integrated traditional healing with modern vaccination campaigns. Success in Burkina Faso could establish a new model for healthcare delivery in developing countries worldwide. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical industry representatives were expressing concerns about intellectual property implications. If traditional healers became integral to vaccine distribution, questions arose about compensation for indigenous knowledge and the ownership of any discoveries that emerged from traditional modern medicine collaboration. Traoré saw opportunity in these complications. Rather than viewing traditional knowledge as an obstacle to modern medicine, Burkina Faso could position itself as a leader in integrated healthcare approaches. The country could become a research center for understanding how traditional and modern medicine could work together effectively. The security situation was also improving as traditional leaders embraced the program. Rural communities that had been suspicious of government initiatives were now expressing cautious optimism. When respected traditional authorities endorsed a program, local resistance typically diminished significantly. Economic projections became more attractive as the integrated approach reduced implementation costs. Training existing traditional healers was less expensive than establishing entirely new healthcare infrastructure. The hybrid model could deliver vaccines more efficiently while strengthening existing community health networks. Gates found himself learning as much as he was teaching. His previous global health initiatives had typically followed Western medical models, attempting to transplant successful programs from developed countries. The Burkina Faso experience was showing him the potential of truly collaborative approaches. As night fell over Ouagadougou, the three key figures, Traoré, Gates, and Mama Diallo, shared a traditional meal prepared according to local customs. The symbolic breaking of bread represented more than hospitality. It signified a new partnership model that honored both innovation and tradition. The handshake between Gates and Traoré had initiated formal negotiations, but the blessing of Mama Diallo transformed the vaccine initiative into something unprecedented. For the first time, a major global health program would fully integrate traditional healing knowledge with cutting-edge medical technology, creating a uniquely African solution to African challenges. 6 months after the historic handshake, construction crews were breaking ground on the most ambitious healthcare project in West African history. The vaccine manufacturing facility in Ouagadougou had evolved from Gates's initial proposal into something far more comprehensive, a medical city that would integrate traditional and modern healing practices under one roof. Traoré stood at the construction site, watching bulldozers clear land that would soon house cutting-edge laboratory equipment alongside spaces designed for traditional healing ceremonies. The fusion of architectural styles reflected the program's innovative approach. Modern glass and steel structures incorporated traditional Burkinabe building materials and design elements. The international response had been mixed but increasingly positive. The World Health Organization had completed its review and granted conditional approval for the vaccine program, with requirements for extensive monitoring and community consultation. This endorsement opened doors to additional funding from European development banks and multilateral organizations. Dr. Mbeki reported remarkable progress in the clinical trials. The new vaccines were showing 94% efficacy against malaria in West African populations, significantly higher than existing treatments. More importantly, side effects were minimal, and traditional healers who had participated in the trials reported that the vaccines seemed compatible with indigenous medicine practices. The training programs for traditional healers had exceeded all expectations. Over 800 healers from across Burkina Faso and neighboring countries had completed the first phase of education, learning about vaccine science while sharing their own knowledge with modern medical practitioners. The cultural exchange was proving valuable for both sides. Mama Diallo had emerged as an unexpected global figure, speaking at international conferences about integrated healthcare approaches. Her presentation to the United Nations General Assembly had been translated into dozens of languages, inspiring similar initiatives in other developing countries. Traditional knowledge was finally receiving recognition in global health policy discussions. The economic impact was already visible in Ouagadougou. The promise of thousands of high-skilled jobs had attracted young Burkinabe who had been studying abroad to return home. Universities reported record enrollment in science and medical programs, as students saw new career opportunities in their own country. However, challenges continued to emerge. Terrorist groups had attempted 2 attacks on construction sites, though both were thwarted by enhanced security measures. The threats had forced delays and increased costs, but Traoré remained committed to the program despite the risks. International pharmaceutical companies were beginning to take notice of the competitive threat. Several major firms had announced their own manufacturing investments in Africa, attempting to establish positions before Burkina Faso's facility became operational. The competition was validating Gates's vision of Africa as a future pharmaceutical hub. The integration of traditional and modern medicine was producing unexpected scientific discoveries. Research teams had identified 3 traditional plant remedies that showed promise for treating bacterial infections resistant to conventional antibiotics. These findings were attracting additional research funding and international collaboration. Gates had made multiple return visits to oversee progress, and address ongoing challenges. Each trip reinforced his conviction that the Burkina Faso model could revolutionize global health delivery. He was already in discussions with leaders in Ghana, Senegal, and Rwanda about adapting the approach for their countries. The facility's design incorporated solar panels and battery systems to ensure reliable power supply, addressing one of the major infrastructure challenges that had historically limited pharmaceutical manufacturing in Africa. The renewable energy systems would make the facility largely energy independent while reducing environmental impact. Training partnerships had been established with universities in the United States, Europe, and Asia, creating exchange programs that would bring international expertise to Burkina Faso while sending Burkina-based students abroad for advanced education. These relationships were building the skilled workforce needed for long-term success. Quality control systems had been designed to meet international pharmaceutical standards while accommodating traditional medicine practices. Separate production lines would handle different types of medicines, preventing contamination while allowing both approaches to operate within the same facility. The community response had shifted dramatically since the initial protests. Rural villages were requesting participation in expanded health programs, and traditional leaders were actively promoting vaccine acceptance. The respectful integration of indigenous knowledge had transformed skepticism into enthusiasm. Traoré's government had used the vaccine program's success to attract additional international investment. Infrastructure projects were being fast-tracked to support the growing pharmaceutical sector, including improved roads, telecommunications networks, and educational facilities. The multiplier effects were exceeding original projections. Regional implications were becoming clearer as neighboring countries requested access to the vaccines and expertise being developed in Burkina Faso. The Economic Community of West African states was discussing establishing a regional pharmaceutical procurement system centered around the Ouagadougou facility. The most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Research collaboration between traditional healers and modern scientists had led to identification of a plant-based compound that could enhance vaccine effectiveness. This discovery could revolutionize vaccine delivery worldwide while providing substantial royalty income to Burkina Faso. Gates reflected on how much the program had evolved since his first handshake with Traoré. What had begun as a conventional vaccine manufacturing proposal had become a new model for international development cooperation. The success was attracting attention from development economists and public health experts worldwide. Security concerns remained, but they were being addressed through comprehensive community engagement. Villages surrounding the facility had become stakeholders in its success, providing additional layers of protection against potential threats. Local ownership was proving to be the best security measure. As the first anniversary of the Gates-Traoré meeting approached, both leaders were preparing for a ceremonial groundbreaking that would officially launch the facility's final construction phase. The event would be attended by heads of state from across Africa and representatives from major international organizations. The second day of meetings began before dawn. Traoré had spent the night reviewing intelligence reports and consulting with trusted advisors about Gates's proposal. The vaccine initiative promised to transform Burkina Faso's healthcare landscape, but the captain needed to understand every detail before committing his nation's future. Dr. Sarah Mbeki, the Gates Foundation's lead scientist for the Africa program, spread technical documents across the conference table. The new vaccine targeted multiple diseases simultaneously: malaria, hepatitis, and several respiratory infections that plagued the region. What made it revolutionary was its ability to provide long-lasting immunity with just 2 doses. Traoré studied the scientific data with the same intensity he had once applied to military strategy. The vaccine used cutting-edge mRNA technology, similar to the COVID-19 vaccines that had proven so effective worldwide. However, this version was specifically adapted for tropical climates and the genetic profiles common in West African populations. The manufacturing proposal was equally impressive. Gates outlined plans for a state-of-the-art facility in Ouagadougou that would employ over 3,000 people directly and create thousands more indirect jobs. The plant would not only serve Burkina Faso, but export vaccines throughout West Africa. positioning the country as a regional healthcare hub. However, questions remained about intellectual property rights and long-term control. Traoré pressed Gates on these concerns, remembering how previous international partnerships had sometimes left African nations dependent on foreign expertise and funding. The Microsoft founder acknowledged these valid concerns and presented a unique ownership structure. Unlike traditional aid programs, this initiative would gradually transfer complete ownership to Burkina Faso over a 10-year period. The Gates Foundation would provide initial funding, technology, and expertise, but local institutions would progressively take control. By 2034, the entire operation would be fully owned and operated by Burkinabe entities. Minister of Health, Dr. Aminata Kabore joined the discussions, bringing crucial perspective on the practical challenges of implementing such an ambitious program. She had seen too many well-intentioned projects fail due to inadequate infrastructure or cultural misunderstanding. Her questions were pointed and realistic. Gates listened carefully as Dr. Kabore outlined the country's healthcare infrastructure limitations. Many rural areas lacked reliable electricity, proper refrigeration for vaccine storage, and trained medical personnel. The new vaccines would require cold chain management and skilled administration, resources that simply didn't exist in many parts of Burkina Faso. The foundation had anticipated these challenges. Their proposal included comprehensive infrastructure development, from solar-powered refrigeration units to mobile vaccination teams equipped with motorcycle transport. Training programs would prepare hundreds of local healthcare workers, creating a skilled workforce that would benefit the country long after the initial program ended. Traoré was particularly interested in the economic projections. Independent. Economists had estimated that successful implementation could boost Burkina Faso's GDP by 12% over the first 5 years. The pharmaceutical sector would become a significant export industry, generating foreign currency and reducing dependence on traditional commodities like cotton and gold. But the young leader also understood the geopolitical implications. Accepting. Gates's partnership would signal a shift toward Western-aligned healthcare policy, potentially affecting relationships with other international partners. Some neighboring countries had already expressed concern about the precedent such cooperation might set. Chinese representatives had recently offered their own vaccine partnership with different terms and conditions. The competition between global powers for influence in Africa was intensifying, and healthcare had become a new battleground. Traoré needed to navigate these complex international relationships while prioritizing his people's immediate needs. During a private lunch break, Gates shared his personal motivation for the project. He spoke about visiting African villages, where preventable diseases claimed young lives daily. The statistics were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of children died annually from conditions that could be easily prevented with proper vaccination programs. Traoré reciprocated with stories from his own childhood, growing up in a rural community where medical care was scarce and expensive. He had lost friends and family members to diseases that were easily treatable in wealthier nations. The emotional connection between the two leaders deepened as they shared these personal experiences. The afternoon sessions focused on implementation, timelines, and risk management. The first vaccines could be produced within 18 months if construction began immediately. Clinical trials would run simultaneously with facility construction, using international standards but including local populations to ensure efficacy and safety for West African genetic profiles. Security concerns also required careful consideration. Burkina Faso faced ongoing challenges with terrorist groups in the Sahel region, who might view the vaccine facility as a strategic target. Gates's team had worked with security experts to design a facility that would be both productive and defensible. As the day concluded, both leaders felt they were approaching a historic agreement. The handshake from the previous day had initiated more than diplomatic courtesy. It had begun a partnership that could reshape healthcare delivery across Africa. However, significant challenges remained, and the most difficult negotiations were still ahead. The morning sun cast long shadows across the presidential palace in Ouagadougou as Captain Ibrahim Traoré adjusted his military uniform one final time. Today would mark a turning point, not just for Burkina Faso, but potentially for the entire African continent. The young leader, who had risen to power through a military coup just 2 years earlier, was about to meet one of the world's most influential philanthropists. Bill Gates stepped out of his bulletproof vehicle, his security, detail scanning the area with practiced efficiency. The Microsoft founder had traveled thousands of miles for this meeting, carrying with him promises of medical breakthrough and controversy in equal measure. His signature blue sweater seemed almost casual against the formal backdrop of the presidential residence, but his eyes held the intensity of a man on a mission. Traoré had spent weeks preparing for this encounter. At 34, he was one of Africa's youngest heads of state, and his rise to power had been anything but conventional. Born in a small village outside Ouagadougou, he had witnessed firsthand the struggles of ordinary Burkina Faso people. Malaria, tuberculosis, and countless other diseases claimed lives daily in his country, where basic health care remained a luxury for many. The two men approached each other in the palace's grand reception hall. Traoré's military bearing contrasted sharply with Gates's relaxed demeanor, yet both carried the weight of enormous responsibility. The handshake that followed would be captured by dozens of cameras, but its significance would only become clear in the months that followed. Gates had arrived with a delegation from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, carrying detailed presentations about a new vaccine initiative. The project, years in development, promised to address multiple diseases simultaneously through innovative mRNA technology. However, this wasn't just another charitable venture. It represented a fundamental shift in how global health initiatives would operate in Africa. Traoré listened intently as Gates outlined his vision. The vaccine program would establish Burkina Faso as a manufacturing hub for West Africa, creating thousands of jobs while providing life-saving medicine to millions. Local facilities would be built, training programs established, and technology transferred to ensure long-term sustainability. The young captain's mind raced as he considered the implications. His country desperately needed economic development and healthcare improvements. Yet he was also acutely aware of the complex history between Western organizations and African nations. Too many times his continent had been promised progress, only to find itself deeper in dependency. Gates sensed the hesitation and leaned forward. He spoke about partnerships, not charity, about building capacity, not creating dependence. His words carried conviction, backed by decades of philanthropic work across the globe. The foundation had already invested billions in African healthcare, with measurable results in countries like Rwanda and Ghana. Outside the palace walls, news of the meeting had already begun to spread. Social media buzzed with speculation and concern. Some viewed Gates as a savior bringing modern medicine to those who needed it most. Others saw him as another wealthy Westerner, seeking to impose his agenda on African soil. Traoré understood that whatever decision he made would define his legacy. He thought about the children in rural villages who died from preventable diseases, the mothers who lost babies to infections that could be easily treated elsewhere. But he also considered the sovereignty of his nation and the importance of making decisions that truly served his people's interests. The conversation continued for hours, moving from formal presentations to candid discussions about implementation challenges. Gates acknowledged the skepticism many Africans felt toward Western-led health initiatives. He emphasized transparency, local control, and the importance of building trust through results rather than promises. As evening approached, both men knew they stood at a crossroads. The vaccine program represented more than medical intervention. It was a test of whether genuine partnership between wealthy philanthropists and African leaders could produce lasting change. The handshake had been just the beginning of negotiations that would determine the health and economic future of millions. Traoré excused himself to consult with his advisors, leaving Gates to contemplate the view from the palace windows. The bustling streets of Ouagadougou stretched into the distance, filled with the energy and potential that had drawn him to Africa decades earlier. Tomorrow would bring more discussions, more questions, and hopefully, more understanding between two men whose different paths had led them to this crucial moment in history.